It is clear that in Zimbabwe what we have is a competitive authoritarian regime. This is a situation where you have guaranteed constitutional rights in the constitution, but citizens are not allowed or cannot freely enjoy those freedoms.
Enough is enough. That's how people in Zimbabwe feel about the cost of living and the direction of the country's politics. And so they wanted to make their voices heard. July 31st was meant to be a day of protest. Civic groups, churches, war veterans, and opposition leaders called on Zimbabweans to take to the streets over proposed constitutional changes. But when the day came, the streets were almost empty. So what happened, and what are the main concerns? That's what's coming up. I am Eddie Micah Jr., and you are welcome to Africa Link, the podcast connecting you to the stories that matter. President Emmerson Mnangagwa recently signed a constitutional amendment bill that extends presidential and parliamentary terms from 5 to 7 years. It essentially delays the next general election from 2028 to 2030, giving the current government 2 extra years in office without a new vote. For many Zimbabweans, it echoes the kind of power extension associated with the Robert Mugabe era. And so, there was a planned protest to call out the government on 31st July. Let's bring in Takura Tsangaza, a political analyst and DW's Privilege Missionary in Harare. Welcome to Africa Link. Privilege, what was expected on July 31st and what actually happened on the ground?
Okay, so on the 31st of July, there had been protests that had been called by pressure groups and some civic society and opposition figures to protest against the passing of the Constitutional Amendment Bill number 3, which is now an act. But there were no visible protests per se across the country. Police maintained high presence in most of the cities. So there were no visible protests that took place on the day. Rather, it was more or less like it started as a slow day. And it turned out, probably we might just say it was more of a stay at home for some. But big business came back to normal as the day went.
Right, Privilege, which is interesting because it was expected to be a big day, right? We were expecting people to be out in their numbers, protesting cost of living, the constitutional amendment, as you mentioned. So why did it not happen in the big way that it was planned, do you think?
I think just observing, it's a number of things. It's a multiple things that may have contributed to the day not turning out to be a proper demonstration or protest that could be visible, people going on the streets. Chief among them is just a lack of clear leadership, I think, in terms of the organizers. I think most protests, if we see what happens in other countries, you have a group, you have a leader, or you have figures that are really fronting the protest. But with this one, yes, of course, there were some people and some figures who were talking about going to protest, but there was these leaders did not come out themselves to go to protest. And then the other thing is that for the Zimbabwean economy, it's a highly informalized economy at the moment. So most people survive on selling. Most people are surviving on doing work for themselves. So at the end of the day, you find that to have a strong and galvanized protest, it takes then people who are saying, okay, fine, we are dropping, maybe we are not going to work, and then we are going to the protest. But for most people, they are working for themselves. And one would then consider to say, if I go for a protest, that means my market stall is not going to be opened, my shop is not going to be opened. Some that are in the informal sector, like say in mining, I'm not going to go to my mine today. So that's one of part of the things that may have contributed as well to this protest not really becoming strong and seeing people going on the streets.
Right. Thank you very much for that. And of course, there were also reports that the government was doing all it can to prevent people from going out. Was there some sort of intimidation? What was the government's role in more or less preventing people from going outside to protest?
Yeah, so what happens in Zimbabwe in terms of protests, maybe to give just a context to that, for you to be able to protest or demonstrate to go on the street, you have to first apply to the police and authorities for you to be allowed to march or even to protest. So hardly do we see, especially protests that have to do with, opposing the government of the day being allowed to go ahead. So first, that's one bottleneck. You won't get permission to go on the streets. You hardly get permission to go on the street. And then secondly, there is the element of heavy police presence in the streets. Even the police themselves, they were issuing out statements to say, warning people not to go on the street. Even though our constitution, under section 59 of the constitution, it guarantees peaceful demonstrations. But police were warning anyone who dared to go on the street on the day. And then you also had some various groups that are aligned to the ruling party. They were also coming out, holding small press conferences and warning anyone who dare to go on the streets. The ruling party itself as well were issuing out statements, as well as statements from government ministers. We had even provincial ministers issuing out statements to warn anyone who dare to go on the streets.
I'm going to come to you, Takura. Let us understand the crunch of the issue here. There's the constitutional change aspect. Let's first dig into that, right? I mean, the Constitution is now doing what exactly, and what do people have against that?
Yeah, the Constitution was changed to extend the term of office of the president, and also that of the parliament, and also that of local government. So it basically means all those that are serving in those positions, particularly the president, will be in office until 2030. There was an election that was scheduled for 2028. So this is what was the primary motivation about the protests, resistance to those constitutional changes, even after they have already been undertaken or passed into law by the signature of the current president himself. So that was those were the key issues around what's in the Constitution. And of course, another issue was around electoral reforms and the voter registration process. But that was not really that popular. I think the most popular reason for any envisioned protest, particularly by the leaders of what remains of Zimbabwe's political opposition and civil society, was this issue of extending the terms of office of incumbent office bearers at national, parliamentary, and local government level, and also the fact that they did not do a referendum to get a broader popular approval from the people of Zimbabwe.
Right. But just to be clear, the way it was done, was that the legal way to change the Constitution? Because if it was legal, then people don't have a case, do they?
Well, changing the Constitution is not just legal. It's very political, particularly in Zimbabwe's case, where major constitutional changes have always been done via a referendum. And the last one was in 2013. So in Zimbabwe's political culture, when you have major changes to the Constitution, there tends to be some plebiscite process where the public just simply votes yes or no. And that is what is then referred to as a referendum. But technically, in terms of the legalese of these amendments. There are constitutional court cases that have been filed about how they were done. But in terms of parliamentary rules and also the parliamentary majority that the ruling ZANU-PF party has, and with the participation of some of the opposition political parties that are in parliament, they technically crossed that Rubicon because there was no parliamentary challenge to the 2/3 majority in order to pass constitutional amendments as designed by the very same constitution that was amended itself.
Right. I think that's an important point. Obviously, if you want to gauge the overall public interest, then a referendum is the best way to change the constitution in any way, shape, or form. So I get that point that you're making. So I mean, what does the public response to all of this tell us about confidence in the government, and the political institutions?
When we look at the public response, basically, it is very easy to point to political fatigue. I think a national political fatigue around the ruling party's policies and its appearance as being almost insurmountable or unchallengeable in power, but also fatigue about the poor state of political opposition in Zimbabwe and its inability to organize as it used to be able to do in the past, and to mobilize and to motivate for its own causes, both popularly and then also in terms of its ideological outlook. So there is general political fatigue in Zimbabwe, and also a general public prioritization of economic survival. Not only because, as Privilege was saying, the economy is largely informal, but also the economy is driven by patronage, proximity to the state and the ruling party. So you have a lot of business entities getting tenders, whether it's in mining or it's in road construction, or even getting spaces to trade in via linkages to the ruling party. So that's a big priority for a lot of ordinary Zimbabweans. How do we survive? Where is the power? Where is the privilege? And where is the patronage that can get us a meal on our tables? But fundamentally, I think there is also a general generational change in understanding politics in Zimbabwe. So you've got a lot of young Zimbabweans that are more interested in basic survival, entertainment, and also departing from Zimbabwe for greener pastures, going to Europe, going to South Africa, going to North America. So their direct interest in politics is now very limited and less ideological. In fact, it is more populist than anything, and materialist in its outlook, to the extent that to persuade them that a constitution and a democratic system really matters will depend on what you put on the table for them. So that's a big dilemma for the Zimbabwean political culture and practice.
I mean, you're basically hammering on some sort of political frustration. And Privilege, coming to you, where is the major frustration at? Is it the cost of living, which clearly is a problem in Zimbabwe? Although if you look on paper, Zimbabwe seems to be turning positively overall, but people are not feeling it in their pockets, right? What are the main issues people are talking about in the country, aside, of course, the political power extension?
Okay, generally speaking, the inequalities that we speak about in the country is that if you look at the ordinary person who is on the street, it may be said that the economy is making huge strides. Yes, these figures that you get from the IMF, the economy having to grow by 8.3% and but go to the ordinary person on the ground, the person who is on the street, the mother who is having to wake up in the morning, scratch their head about where to get the next meal for her family. A lot of families are not making, it is not easy for them to survive. So at the end of the day, a lot of people survive from hand to mouth. The unemployment rates that we have in Zimbabwe are quite high. And we have hence we have our economy and most people working in the informal sector. You have so many people surviving on selling, buying and selling. You go into the streets of the capital, mothers, the youths, generally a lot of people are trying to sell whatever they can to be able to survive. So at the end of the day, those are some of the frustrations. You might find that, yes, of course, there are some people who are benefiting from the system, and they from time to time they get trinkets, they get opportunities, small opportunities from the ruling party because of the patronage. But generally, a number of people are not finding it easy across board in the economy.
Right. So what do people expect right now from their governments to make sure that at least that they feel heard? What are the main things that they expect from their government?
I think the major issue is about employment and job creation. People are looking up to the government for such things, job creation, employment, and to make it easy for the public institutions to deliver what they are supposed to deliver. Say, if I go to the hospital today, I can be able to be treated, or I can be able to get medication. But if you find ordinary people going to the hospital, they are not getting the services that they are supposed to get. Look at infrastructure. Yes, of course, there are strides that have been made in some sectors where you see some semblance of development, but our infrastructure is not in a good state. If you look at our roads, if you look at even the service delivery in our urban councils. So those are some of the issues that, Zimbabweans have to grapple with on a daily basis. So it may not be.
And is there any sign, just not to, a quick one on this, are there any signs that the government is listening to the people and is actually making moves to positively respond to the concerns of the people?
It's a difficult one to measure and to look at in terms of the moves. Yes, there are pockets of development that you may see. Maybe the government may say, we have constructed a road, or we have constructed a hospital, or we are providing this. But at the end of the day, it has to translate into the change in people's lives. But that is not happening significantly. So at the end of the day, it's not that people are satisfied when they are not going in the street in numbers to protest. It's a question of saying, you think twice to go on the streets. Do I sacrifice my life? Do I want to risk myself? But at the end of the day, it's not like things are okay when someone is at home, or when someone is going to work, or when someone is trying to sell something on the street.
Right. Thank you very much, Privilege. Takura, people want change. People want to feel the positive strides that's happening in Zimbabwe in their pockets. They're not feeling it yet, hence the frustration we've been talking about. Why are people not feeling the change yet? Is this a leadership problem? Is it just maybe because Zimbabwe has been through a lot over the years, for decades? They were basically disconnected from the international world, sanctions upon sanctions that really affected their economy. So maybe it's just going to take time. Or is that really cutting the government too much slack?
Yeah, that would be cutting the government too much slack. They are completely elitist in their approach to the national political economy. And I mentioned political economy because in Zimbabwe's case, particularly after the promise of the fast-track land reform program, based on the liberation struggle values and so on, about equality and access to land, they have become a very neoliberal economic policy government. They are pandering to the World Bank, the IMF. So their approach and why people are not feeling the government's efforts in their pockets is what is generally referred to as trickle-down economics. So trickle-down economics basically means you give priority to private capital, and private capital eventually, depending on how liberal your economic system is, eventually creates jobs, creates salaries, and looks after people's well-being after making a profit. That model historically has been proven not to work. But the government itself has announced since 2017, in fact, after the coup, not a coup, that it is open for business and that its priority is private capital. So it does not intend to do any sort of social welfareist programs where in the last 8 or so years, people begin to feel improvements in their lives. No, that's not going to happen with this current government.
I'd like to end with you, Takura. We're talking about all the wrong things the government is doing. What do you expect the government to do now to really bring about that much needed change?
Well, first of all, the government has to change its economic policy. The economic policy it has right now is not suitable for a stable and sustainable economic future for Zimbabwe, because too many people are being left out and they are creating too many groups that appear to be almost like economic cartels that are linked to the ruling party, that are in charge of education, that are in charge of mining, that are also in charge of road and other infrastructure construction. And then the government also has to change its political intentions. Even if it has changed the constitution, it must at least allow people to assemble and to express themselves freely. It must allow multiple political narratives that allow everybody to express themselves, join a political party of their choice, leave the churches to do religion and not co-opt them into political processes that they cannot understand. And above all, ensure that the judiciary and the security services are independent from political interference.
Right. I do hope that members of parliament, people in authority inside Zimbabwe who are listening to us right now are going to pick a few points from that. The frustration for many is that it's not as if people do not know or the leaders do not know what to do. They know, it's assumed, but it's just not carried out for whatever the political reasons may be. So we will keep talking about it and hope that it falls on listening ears. Takura Zangaza, political analyst, thank you very much for your time. Also, DW's Privilege Mushanari in Harare. Thank you too.
Thank you, Eddie. My pleasure.
Thank you, Eddie. A great pleasure to be here.
Africa Link, every weekday here on DW.
Zimbabweans now face an extended wait, 2 more years before their next real chance to vote for change. While official figures claim the economy is growing, the reality on the ground is stark. Nearly a third of the country's young people remain unemployed, struggling to find meaningful opportunities.
No dictatorship exists forever. No tyrant will live forever. We had a similar situation right here in Zimbabwe before 1980. The Rhodesia Front, Ian Smith and his government thought they were invincible. But when the people organized themselves, they confronted the seemingly invincible regime and defeated it. So what must happen in Zimbabwe is that the citizens must come together. The citizens must unite. The citizens must organize themselves. There is no dictatorship that can defeat an organized people. There is no dictatorship that can defeat a united people. So this is what Zimbabweans need to do.
Zimbabwe's economic and political crises are deeply intertwined. Years of inflation, persistent unemployment, and ongoing currency instability have fueled widespread frustration. Rights groups warn that shrinking civic space is making it increasingly difficult for citizens to speak out. What do you think? Share your thoughts on Facebook and TikTok at DW Africa. Listen to us on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. And subscribe to our DW Africa YouTube channel so you never miss an episode. This show was co-produced and edited by Isaac Mugabe. And I am Eddie Micah Jr. Thanks for listening.
DW. Made for minds.